Her sweet, delicate sister looked her in the eye and said, "He was never really yours." Caroline thought she won the prize, parading the stolen boyfriend like a trophy. But the smirk wipes off her face instantly when she sees who her sister brought to the gala. He's 6'3", sharp-jawed, and holding her waist while the whole room stares. Karma arrives in a custom-tailored suit. Listen closely, because tonight you and I are going to unpack a profound study in transformation. 3 weeks ago, Arya Vale was the punchline of this exact room, Marcus. The man she loved did not just leave her, he humiliated her. Openly choosing her sister across a quiet dinner table, they fully expected her to dissolve into a ghost. Yet here she is, stepping into the glaring light of the Whitmore Gala, holding the arm of Luca Darrow, a man whose mere shadow makes old money sweat. We are watching a shattered girl rebuild herself from the glass of her own ruin. It is a harsh truth, but sometimes the deepest, ugliest wounds we endure are exactly the fires that teach us how to forge our permanent armor. The massive crystal chandelier hangs suspended over the ballroom like a glowing, heavy monument to excess. Arya feels the crushing weight of this room pressing against her collarbones. Not so long ago, she was just a ghost in these halls, forcing hollow smiles while Marcus abandoned her to chase wealth and status. But that desperate, pleading version of her died on a Tuesday. Tonight, the harsh, blinding light, bouncing off the glass, cuts through the suffocating air differently. It exposes the painted masks these elites wear to disguise their rotting morals. It is an incredibly isolating realization to have. You eventually learn that the brightest, most extravagant rooms on Earth often serve only to conceal the absolute darkest and emptiest human hearts. She stands frozen at the crest of the staircase. Her fingertips barely graze Luca's jacket, maintaining a rigid boundary. She refuses to cling to him like someone begging for shelter. Luca does not look down. His jaw is locked, his voice a low, commanding rumble against the music. "You are doing fine," he murmurs. She swallows the dry panic in her throat, whispering that she has not even done anything yet. "Exactly," he replies smoothly. Below them stretches a suffocating ocean of designer tuxedos and inherited empires. Somewhere in that cage, Marcus is watching, her treacherous sister Caroline is watching. It is a brutal pill to swallow. But sometimes the people who share your exact bloodline are the very first ones willing to draw it. Arya feels her jaw lock with such intense pressure that her teeth ache. "Easy," Luca warns, his tone laced with a dangerous edge. He keeps his gaze fixed forward, sweeping the crowded floor like a predator evaluating territory. "If you tense up, they will smell the fear," he advises. "I am not tense," she lies, fighting to project strength. "You are vibrating," he fires back. Defeated, she exhales a shaky breath and forces her rigid spine to yield. He sees straight through her armor, which is both infuriating and strangely grounding. Walking alongside a man with that level of raw power is deeply dangerous. Yet sometimes, you absolutely need a catastrophic fire to permanently burn away the toxic rot of your old life. For his own quiet, calculated reasons, Luca chose to walk her into this social slaughterhouse. As their shoes hit the marble, a waiter instantly materializes. Luca takes 2 glasses, pressing one against her cold palm. "You do not even have to drink it," he murmurs. "Just hold it to give your trembling hands a purpose." "I know how champagne works," she snaps. "Do you?" he asks, a faint smirk pulling at his mouth. Then his voice drops to a grave whisper. 11 o'clock, Marcus just spotted you." Arya feels her heart slam violently against her ribs. "What does he look like?" she asks blindly. "Like a man who just realized his entire world is over," Luca replies. Life has a deeply poetic way of dragging our worst mistakes straight to our front door, precisely when we think we are safe. Marcus is paralyzed beside the heavy mahogany bar. His drink hovers uselessly in the air, his face completely drained of color as sheer panic fractures her composure. It is a spectacular, silent psychological collapse. Arya deliberately shifts her gaze, dismissing him like a smudge on a pristine window. "How do you feel?" Luca asks, his voice slicing clean through the jazz music. "Like my stomach is in knots," she confesses. "That is expected," he assures her. "You are incinerating 3 years of trauma in mere hours. I would question your sanity if you were not terrified. Listen to me, because you and I both know this truth. Discovering the hollow nature of the people you once loved is often the quietest, most agonizing wake-up call a human being can endure." A socialite in emerald silk snaps her neck to stare, whispering pure venom to her husband. An older couple offers Luca a rigid nod, masking their harsh judgment. These are the quiet enablers. The people who knew what Marcus was doing yet chose complicity over the truth. "Luca, mans. I am smiling," she retorts. "No, you are merely baring your teeth," he corrects, We have all worn that exact mask, a grimace pretending to be joy. Taking a sharp breath, Arya softens her jaw, replacing her tension with a slow, devastating smirk. Much better, Luca whispers. Let us make them sweat. Understand this fundamental lesson of survival. Genuine power is walking directly into the predator's den and acting as if you hold the deed to the property. Used to worship these empty elites as the untouchable gods of the city. A man named Robert steps into their path. Luca, he exclaims with fabricated warmth. I did not expect to find you here. Luca meets the gesture with an icy handshake. I do not attend charity functions, he replies flatly. I made an exception. Robert locks his greedy eyes onto Arya, searching for a weak point. This is Arya Vale, Luca states. He does not reduce her to a nameless state. He wields her name like a heavy weapon. Robert's calculating mind visibly short-circuits as he takes her hand. A nearby woman leans in, feigning innocence to ask why that name sounds familiar. Here is the reality of treacherous spaces. True emotional grace is maintaining absolute stillness while the vultures circle overhead. She focuses on editorial curation. Luca lies with an effortless, untouchable arrogance. You have undoubtedly seen her work in Vogue. It is a brilliant deception. Arya is merely a freelance writer, but the gossiping woman instantly nods her head, terrified of looking out of touch. Oh yes, naturally, she hums, swirling her drink. It is a fascinating phenomenon. Society will always validate the exact worth you fiercely demand for yourself. The idle chatter drags on, pivoting to corporate mergers. Arya stands like sovereign royalty, her knuckles steady on her glass. She plays the role flawlessly, offering quiet, mysterious laughs, yet never uttering a single word. Complete silence is utterly terrifying to empty people who rely on the sound of their own voices for relevance. Genuinely did not utter a single syllable, Arya whispers. That is the point, Luca replies, a dark satisfaction settling over his sharp features. You let their empty minds construct the narrative. That is the absolute height of control. Arya takes a slow sip of her champagne. It tastes expensive but entirely soulless. I do not understand how you tolerate this toxic environment, she confesses. Practice, he answers dryly. That is a hollow explanation, she challenges. Luca faces her fully, his gaze heavy with brutal clarity. Do you want the truth, he asks. I stopped caring the second I realized they are all terrified of being insignificant. Let us look at this together. When you strip away the tailored designer suits, deep human insecurity always wears the exact same face. Slowly rotates, the inevitable collision has arrived. Marcus stands mere feet away, shoving his hands into his pockets. He looks diminished, a pathetic shadow compared to the man who shattered her world. Exhausted shadows under his eyes signal a guilty conscience. Or perhaps he always possessed this cowardly aura, and her devotion simply veiled it. Marcus, she acknowledges, her tone at absolute zero. He swallows hard, evaluating Luca before his facade cracks. Can we speak, he pleads. We are speaking. She counters coldly. I meant in private, he begs. Luca remains motionless, a terrifying sentinel of pure intimidation. Here is a vital truth about emotional recovery. Forgiveness might cleanse your spirit, but erecting an impenetrable boundary is the only way you survive. He tenses his jaw under the pressure. Arya, please. He pleads no, that single syllable hangs in the air, devastating and irreversible. Marcus recoils as if struck. I just wanted to provide context, he stammers. I said no, she reiterates. Devoid of mercy. In that precise second, the architecture of his massive ego collapses into dust. He looks victimized, fully expecting her to cave and deliver the cheap absolution his toxic conscience required. Stick with me on this final point. We never owe our hard-earned closure to the very architects of our destruction. Enjoy your evening, Arya murmurs, turning her back on him forever. Luca matches her stride as they step onto the freezing balcony in the cold night air. Arya closes her eyes and finally draws a full, liberating breath. Let us examine this scene together, you and I. The city lights bleed into the fog below like shattered glass. Arya grips the icy balcony railing, the freezing wind whipping her hair as she watches her former lover, looking impossibly pathetic inside beside her. Luca, a man sculpted from violent tailored wool, offers a smile sharp enough to draw blood. Let him suffocate on his own hollow chest, he murmurs. Inside, nothing but counterfeit laughter. Out here, there is only truth. When she asks why an enforcer cares about her ruin, his jaw tightens. He confesses, his voice heavy with ghosts, that he knows exactly what it costs to be discarded by those you trust. The lesson remains profoundly simple. Never let anyone shrink your spirit just because they lack the courage to handle your true potential. The camera pushes in as the suffocating tension of the ballroom bleeds through the glass. Arya studies the enforcer, catching the lethal outline of the weapon beneath his jacket. She breathes a frail gratitude into the night. Luca barely blinks, softly warning her to swallow her celebration. He pushes his shoulders off the frozen rail. The true tragedy is only just beginning, he murmurs, because her traitorous sister has arrived. Arya forgets how to breathe. Luca tracks the room like a hunting wolf, noting Caroline remains utterly blind to their presence. Terror paralyzes Arya, but Luca anchors her with a stare forged from unyielding iron. The truth is absolute. When fear turns your veins to ice, sometimes you only need one soul, willing to bet their faith on the fierce strength you forgot you possessed. The lens focuses on her trembling hands. Luca refuses to let her fade into the shadows. His voice becomes a brutal anchor against her panic. He leans in, reminding her she has already monsters survived, disguised as men. She endured the lover who shattered her, and she will dominate this room. When Arya asks what happens if she breaks, Luca delivers a cold truth. Fall apart tomorrow, he commands, but never where the enemy can see you bleed. She nods, forging her fear into a gleaming blade as they step into the blinding light. Across the floor, Caroline reigns by the champagne tower like counterfeit royalty. Arya feels her ribcage tighten, but Luca quietly orders her to inhale. The lesson is vital. Save your grief for the quiet dark, and never gift your betrayers the sweet satisfaction of watching you completely break. The camera tracks them carving through the ballroom with lethal authority. The second Caroline spots her sister, her facade violently crumbles. The room seems to lose its breath as that manufactured smile turns to ash. Arya absorbs every ounce of her rival's panic. Luca maintains a terrifyingly calm stride, his dark energy bleeding into Arya's posture. They glide past the traitor, close enough for Caroline to realize she is escorted by the deadliest enforcer in the city. The crystal glass in Caroline's paralyzed hand shakes. Arya gifts her a razor-thin smile and never breaks stride. When Luca murmurs to ask how she is faring, she whispers her hands are trembling. He smoothly replies she does not look it at all. The takeaway isn't profound. Confidence is just a heavy iron armor you force yourself to wear, until the cold metal finally fuses with your skin. The lighting dims as the orchestra swells into a melancholic waltz. Luca extends his hand, commanding her to dance. Arya hesitates, confessing her lack of grace. Luca dismisses the terror, noting that perfection is hardly their objective. She surrenders her fingers to him, and this ruthless criminal pulls her into the spotlight with agonizing gentleness. They sway, moving like phantoms detached from the music. When Arya whispers that every eye is devouring them, he calmly orders her to let them stare. Over his shoulder, she spots Marcus at the bar, his jaw locked in impotent fury, spinning beneath the blinding crystal chandeliers. Arya realizes the tragedy is finally over. The absolute best revenge is existing fearlessly in your own brilliant light, forcing your betrayers to watch you remain beautifully unbothered by their existence. You and I have likely experienced this exact kind of deafening silence. The camera closes in as Luca points out her sudden smile. She searches his dark eyes, and beneath the lethal armor of an enforcer, she uncovers a fierce, sheltering warmth. She breathes a final, shattering thank you. When the music bleeds out, he slowly releases her, and the sudden distance feels violently cold. He guides her away from the glare, onto a shadowed terrace that reduces the ballroom to a hollow hum. Leaning against the cold iron, staring into the dark skyline, Arya confesses a terrifying truth. She is just waiting for the emotional crash to finally break her. The hardest part of surviving profound trauma is never the brutal impact. It is standing in the quiet aftermath, waiting for the delayed shockwaves to pull you entirely under. Let us dissect this frame by frame. Luca tilts his head, asking what ghost she is waiting for. Arya drops her gaze, admitting she expected violent rage to tear her apart, but all she feels is a hollow ache, she whispers, terrified that this absolute numbness means she is broken. The camera catches Luca standing as a dark silhouette against the bleeding neon. He rejects her fear, stating the pain has simply burned itself out. When she argues she might just be empty, his jaw tightens. He locks his fierce eyes onto hers. She could have cowered and let those vipers win, he growls instead. She marched directly into the inferno. That is not numbness. That is an active choice. True strength is never the absence of terror. It is choosing to walk onto the battlefield when your spirit is completely drained. Arya swallows her argument, realizing this brutal man is right. She consciously chose the fire. The glass doors suddenly swing open. A drunken couple stumbles out, but one glance at the murderous stillness of Luca's posture sends them scurrying inside. Luca smoothly checks his silver watch. 2 hours is enough, he declares. When she hesitates, he delivers a tactical truth. She has carved her victory into their minds, and lingering only cheapens the execution. Arya breathes in the sharp wisdom. Their final exit across the ballroom is a masterpiece of dominance. Marcus chokes on his fury, and Caroline is decimated. Arya refuses to offer her ghosts a backward glance. A black sedan waits in the creeping fog, and she sinks into the dark leather. The lesson is undeniable. Always abandon the battlefield while you are still the undisputed victor. The head of the heavy door seals them in silence, severing the tragedy of the night. Arya collapses against the seat, exhaling a jagged breath she has carried for weeks. Streetlights paint rhythmic shadows over Luca's face. "You survived," he murmurs. She confesses she is hollowed out, running purely on toxic adrenaline. He stares out the tinted glass, assuring her that bone-deep exhaustion is the true price of surviving a war. As the tires hiss against the damp asphalt, she asks what she does tomorrow. "Sleep and breathe," he advises. But she demands to know why an enforcer dragged her out of the dark. Retreating into the pitch-black shadows of the car, he whispers his agonizing truth. He knows the exact sting of being entirely thrown to the wolves. The lesson is profound. Sometimes, just taking one more breath is the most defiant victory a broken soul can claim. Arya refuses to accept his vague deflection, pushing until the enforcer finally breaks. When she demands the truth, Luca drops his flawless mask. Dim streetlights catch the profound grief violently fracturing his cold exterior. "Maybe someday," he whispers into the shadows, "but not tonight." The sedan rolls to a silent halt outside her building. Stepping onto the freezing concrete, she turns to the window. Offering one last piece of trembling gratitude, he nods once, ordering her to sleep. Before the car dissolves into the choking fog, left alone on the wet pavement, Arya feels an irreversible shift inside her chest. The shattered pieces of her history have finally fused. She walked through the blazing inferno of her own ruin and emerged alive. The wisdom is absolute. The very flames designed to reduce you to ash are what forge your spirit into unbending steel. Stick with me because we are unpacking the most devastating frame of this story. It is the agonizing hour when the adrenaline flames. Arya drops her bag, standing alone in the dark apartment. Suddenly, her phone screen cuts through the shadows. A message from an unknown number reads, "She was a masterpiece tonight, signed only with the letter L." She stares at the text before flipping the phone face down. Her hands are shaking violently, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of surviving the inferno. She stared into the eyes of her abusers and walked out victorious. Yet, her throat burns with heavy tears. She pours a glass of water, the sound echoing like thunder. Here is the final truth. Surviving a brutal emotional war never means you get to bypass the devastating crash that inevitably follows. The camera angles down as Arya presses her palms against the freezing granite. She desperately attempts the breathing rhythm Luca taught her. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale. But counting is useless when the heavy dam inside your ribcage violently splinters. The tears do not merely fall, they erupt in a scalding flood. This weeping is not for a fresh betrayal. These are the guttural sobs that tear through a soul, only when heavy armor has been worn for far too long, and the exhausted spirit realizes it is safe to collapse. She slides down the cabinets, hits the cold floor, and surrenders completely to the profound grief. Time simply dissolves in the shadows of the kitchen. You and I have likely felt this exact breaking point. We absolutely must let the brutal breakdown wash over us before any true healing can ever begin. Weeping ceases, leaving Arya completely hollowed out, as if the poison has been scraped from her veins. She collapses into heavy sleep, but morning arrives with blinding cruelty. Sunlight slashes the bedroom walls as her phone erupts into violent vibration. 12 missed calls, 23 frantic messages. The society vultures are circling, desperate to unmask the terrifying phantom from last night. Then, one notification freezes her blood. A message from her mother, demanding a conversation right this second. Arya drops the device, staring at the ceiling. Her mother has returned, and that means absolute war. The brutal truth we must all face is that the moment you believe you have finally escaped your dark history, it always finds a twisted way to drag you right back into the fire. I need to look at this tragedy piece by piece. The second Arya walks away from the gala, Caroline begins spinning a twisted narrative, playing the eternal victim. Arya has zero patience left for that radioactive family theater. The phone buzzes. It is her mother. The voice on the line drips with that suffocating disappointment, designed to completely wreck a spirit. Exhausted, Arya reminds her, it is barely 11 in the morning. A heavy pause follows. Her mother reveals Caroline told everyone about Arya leaving with the ruthless Luca Darrow. Instead of defending herself, Arya simply owns it. She confirms the truth without a single flinch sometimes. The only way to completely dismantle a toxic game is to stop hiding your shadow and boldly claim every move you make. Conversation plunges into darkness. Her mother drops a warning, demanding to know if Arya comprehends the fatal danger surrounding a man like Luca. He is a ruthless boss whose enemies simply vanish. Hearing this, Arya almost laughs at the bitter hypocrisy. She thinks of Marcus, a man whose own brand of destruction was fully endorsed by this exact same family. She tries to point out the double standard, but the line goes dead, tossing the phone across the bed. Arya sheds no tears. She just feels the razor-sharp edge of betrayal slicing deep into her chest. It is a profound tragedy when you realize the truth. The people who are supposed to be your ultimate sanctuary are often the ones quietly pouring gasoline all over your front porch. Perhaps it is pure rage, or maybe the crushing exhaustion of always bleeding out just to keep her family comfortable. Arya drags her aching body to the shower, letting scalding water wash away the gala. She brews coffee so dark it could wake the dead. Sitting at her wooden desk, that burning anger crystallizes into absolute focus. She stares at the half-finished portraits on her laptop and methodically closes every single tab. That old compliant version of her is dead. She opens her email, scrolling until a single word jumps off the screen. Opportunity. This is exactly how the universe operates. The most brilliant open doors only appear the exact second you finally refuse to let the ghosts of your past dictate your future. Almost deletes the message, but a sharp instinct forces her to click. The email is from a senior editor at Prestige magazine, a publication representing the absolute peak of the art world. The editor is aggressively hyping her recent brushwork and requesting a formal pitch meeting. Arya reads the words 3 separate times, completely paralyzed by shock. It defies all logic. Just 12 months ago, these exact same executives handed her a brutal rejection. She knows her canvas work is brilliant, but she never imagined she was ready for that elite tier. It is endlessly fascinating how humans react to sudden success. We instantly start doubting our own true worth when a massive victory arrives, forgetting that proper timing and placement are just as vital as the actual talent itself. There is always a hidden catch. Suspicion hits her like a blow, and she searches the company name. There it is, staring her in the face. Luca quietly bought a controlling stake in the magazine 6 months ago. He literally owns the chessboard. He pulled his invisible strings to kick those heavy doors wide open for her. Arya sits there, torn between fierce independence and bone-deep exhaustion. Then her phone lights up. A text from him demanding lunch, stating a car is already on the way. Her first instinct is to reply that she does not require a savior. But let us be brutally honest. Sometimes foolish pride is just an incredibly heavy stone to carry, and the smartest thing you can do is allow a powerful ally to help you bear the crushing weight. She hits reply with one single word, okay. By 1:45, a sleek black sedan is idling at her curb. The driver offers zero small talk. Giving a stiff nod as she slides into the leather seats, they drift through the city, rolling into a forgotten, shadow-drenched brick neighborhood. The car stops at an unmarked door with faded numbers. The moment she steps out, the vehicle vanishes down the alley. Inside, the atmosphere is dim and heavy with unspoken power. Luca is positioned in the darkest back corner like a reigning king, his eyes locked on the entrance. He stands up slowly, whispering that he cannot believe she actually showed up. Never forget this reality sometimes. Stepping straight into the terrifying unknown is the bravest thing a broken person can possibly do. I would show up, she fires back. He tilts his head and admits he was hoping she would. They slide into a velvet booth just as a silent waiter drops the menus and vanishes. Arya folds her trembling hands and locks eyes with this intimidating man. She flat out accuses him of buying her the magazine feature. Luca does not blink. He smoothly claims he merely made a polite introduction. She refuses to back down, reminding him that owning the company changes the dynamic. He leans back into the shadows. Asking if she is genuinely angry, he insists he only forced the editors to look at her canvas, but her talent earned the spot. It sounds wild, but it is true. Sometimes you desperately need a complete stranger to recognize your ultimate potential before you can ever see it yourself. She shakes her head, claiming he has not even seen her real portfolio. But here comes the twist. He casually mentions he spent his morning studying her old website. His voice drops into a low register as he lays out the facts. Her paintings are masterpieces, and her only failure was spending years standing in the wrong rooms. Arya is completely paralyzed, feeling utterly exposed. The waiter materializes, and Luca effortlessly orders for them in perfect Italian. She is too stunned to fight it. When the silence returns, he stares right through her, fully aware she is questioning his motives. She whispers that she asked why earlier, and he completely dodged it. Listen closely. True connection only begins the exact second you stop playing polite games and demand the absolute truth. He goes quiet, his finger slowly tracing the rim of his glass like a man standing over a grave. 5 years ago, he whispers. He was engaged to a woman named Isabel. They were the picture of absolute power. Arya barely breathes as he drops the hammer. 2 weeks before the wedding, Isabel vanished with his business partner of 10 years. The magnitude of the disrespect is staggering. Arya softly apologizes, but he rigidly brushes it away. He calls it the ultimate awakening. It proved that loyalty is merely an illusion until the fire gets hot. Most people instantly fold, but those who stand firm, invaluable. Here is the golden rule. Trust is a mirror, and once shattered, you only ever show your reflection to those who will not bleed, while holding the broken pieces. Peter returns with elegant plates of pasta, but Arya has lost her appetite. She picks up her fork and sets it down. She looks into his eyes and confesses she cannot figure him out at all, her voice trembling with vulnerability. Luca smirks, murmuring that is exactly how he prefers it. The table goes silent. The food is perfection, yet to Arya, it feels like cardboard. Her mind races, trying to visualize this fortress of a man being emotionally leveled by someone he loved. She finally asks the heaviest question. Does he regret letting someone in? Luca holds her gaze and replies that he only regrets choosing the wrong player, never the game itself. You and I must remember this truth. A heart that completely refuses to risk taking another shot is a heart that is already resting in a coffin. We must examine this moment where Luca's true origin is exposed. He confesses that his past betrayal was a brutal necessity. Without it, he would have become a man he despised. He made a calculated choice to be feared rather than remain a victim. When Arya challenges his endgame, Luca clarifies that he demands absolute respect, and fear is merely the fastest weapon to secure it. Looking past his expensive exterior, Arya recognizes a profound psychological damage that mirrors her own trauma. She quietly vows never to let her pain harden her in the same way. Trauma is a relentless force, acting as either a dark emotional prison or a fiery forge. Ultimately, we are the ones who must choose the kind of armor we wear to survive, deciding whether we heal or merely hide. Let us set the scene. The lighting is harsh, cutting across Luca's features as he shatters Arya's fragile armor. He asks if she truly intends to freeze her heart entirely. When she gives a small, broken nod, he dismantles the lie. He watches the sorrow in her eyes, reminding her that genuine monsters never pause to grieve the souls they ruin. They simply sink into the black and manufacture excuses later. The silence stretches until Arya confesses, her breath hitching, that Marcus left a voicemail. Luca does not flinch. He delivers a heavy, grounding truth. Giving him space in her head is offering free rent to a ghost she already evicted. Real freedom, the kind that saves your life, means walking away and refusing to turn around, even when the past screams your name. You and I have felt this pull, that toxic curiosity threatening to drag us into the dark. The camera lingers on her trembling hands as she searches for an excuse to relapse, wondering if Marcus is genuinely sorry. Luca grounds the frame immediately. His voice is a steady anchor, reminding her that an apology is just empty noise and never buys a second. When she asks if Marcus wants her back, Luca forces the lens onto her own soul. He demands to know if she even wants him. She breathes out a tearful no. He nods, making it clear that her abuser's desires no longer matter. She is trapped in the echo of betrayal. We must remember this painful truth. The most agonizing chains to shatter are the ones we willingly lock around our own wrists. We have all witnessed this quiet, agonizing devastation. Picture the scene playing out. Arya sits at a warm family dinner, her mother casually joking about future grandchildren. The camera catches Marcus freezing completely. In the background, out of focus but undeniable, he shares a secret, loaded glance with Caroline. Hearing this memory, the lighting around Luca seems to darken. His eyes flash with a terrifying, protective fury as he demands to know how she reacted. Arya admits she swallowed the bitter taste of disgust, holding a flawless smile until they were alone, only for him to offer a careless shrug. Keeping your composure in the face of absolute disrespect shows incredible dignity, but heed this warning. Never allow your own beautiful, quiet strength to slowly bury you alive. The psychological toll finally causes her defensive walls to crumble. She describes the sheer absurdity of her betrayers, treating their cruelty like an uncontrollable storm. Marcus claimed he never meant to hurt her, while Caroline weaponized her tears. It is a pathetic script designed to erase 6 months of calculated lies. Arya harshly condemns herself for being blind, but Luca rewrites the narrative. He whispers that her only error was placing trust in broken people. This points to a heartbreaking reality. The deepest wounds happen when we hand our purest loyalty to those who cannot hold it. The camera lingers as Luca slowly reaches out to comfort her, but pulls back at the last second. It is a tragic, beautiful masterclass in building tension through restraint. Luca sharply demands her focus. He dismantles the anatomy of the betrayal, insisting that their deceit highlights their own moral bankruptcy, not her failure to see the truth. She missed the warning signs because her mind is simply incapable of such dark manipulation. It is a vital truth we must all hold close. Never apologize for walking through a bitter world with an honest heart. When she weeps that her goodness feels like a heavy chain, he softly promises that the weight will lift. The scene cuts to them stepping into the sharp night air. He waves off his waiting car, choosing instead to walk quietly beside her. After a beautifully paced stretch of silence, he turns to her, asking her to finally drop the armor and reveal something entirely real about herself, demanding absolute vulnerability. Taking a ragged breath, Arya confesses her most paralyzing terror. She is terrified of slipping into old habits and letting herself be emotionally slaughtered all over again. The camera halts as Luca stops walking. He forces her to meet his intense gaze, declaring with unshakable authority that he will never let that happen. When she trembles with doubt, he explains that her fear is proof she is awake. The people who repeat their tragedies are the ones waking with their eyes closed. She aches to believe him, but hope is still a prelude to agony. As the long cinematic shadows stretch over them, a quiet truth settles in. Staring directly into your darkest insecurities is the only way to break the curse of repeating them. Let us examine this brilliant shift in the frame. Arya bluntly asks what a man like Luca could possibly gain from helping her. He lets the question hang in the cold air before answering with brutal honesty. He wants a front-row seat to watch her evolve into a formidable force, far removed from the shattered girl her past tried to create to him. That rebirth is an intoxicating investment. This hits deeply because we all secretly crave someone who sees our fierce potential. When we are blinded by grief, they walk until true night takes over. When his car finally arrives, he leaves the pace of their future entirely in her hands. As the taillights fade into the blackness, the camera catches Arya studying her reflection, forever altered by the presence of this dark protector. The narrative tightens like a wire. The moment a new voicemail from Marcus illuminates her phone, we see the agonizing war play out across her face, the instinct to run battling the toxic hunger to listen. Her trembling finger hits play. The voice pouring out is utterly broken. His arrogance is gone, replaced by desperate weeping as he realizes the immense value of what he threw away. Yet, the detached angle of the camera reminds us, this is just another manipulation. It brings a chilling reality to light. The most beautiful apology in the world cannot glue a shattered soul back together. Regret always screams the loudest when the audience has already left the theater. True survival means keeping the deadbolt firmly locked against the haunting ghosts of your past. And the audio clicks off. The lighting in the room shifts. Arya makes her irreversible move. She deletes the file and permanently blocks his number. It is an act of sheer rebellion. We often romanticize healing, but in truth, it is the violent, active choice to slam a heavy door shut. She flips open her laptop and signs a major photography contract. Almost immediately, a text arrives from Luca. He tells her he is proud. When she asks how he could possibly know, he simply replies that he understands her. It is an intoxicating, dangerous connection. Lying in the dark, she wonders if she is truly healing or just trading one obsession for another. But stepping into the terrifying unknown is the only way to avoid the ultimate tragedy of staying broken. First time in weeks, the suffocating grip of anxiety loosens. She pulls in a single, unbruised breath. If you have survived betrayal, you know these microscopic victories mean everything. The pacing shifts abruptly when her phone rings. It is Elaine Cortez, a titan of the publishing world. Arya freezes, knuckles white around her pen. Elaine is commissioning a massive 12-page editorial on formidable women. She demands a photographer who can capture raw vulnerability, declaring Arya the only artist for the job. The kinetic energy of having your authentic talent validated is beautifully captured on screen. It leaves us with a profound realization: your greatest passions will eventually save you, provided you simply survive the darkest chapters long enough to finally see the dawn. Elaine outlines the staggering terms: a fully funded shoot in New York, total creative autonomy, and a $15,000 payout. You can visibly see Arya's mind stall. This money will permanently sever the chains of her past. She forces her voice to remain professional, but the second the call ends, her hands begin to shake. This time, the tremor is not a symptom of trauma. It is the physical manifestation of pure, wild hope. She types a message to Luca to share the triumph. His response is instantaneous and dripping with his usual calm. He simply writes, "I know. We are watching a magnificent emotional pivot when the toxic ghosts of your past are replaced by the terrifying thrill of the future. You realize the truth. You are no longer just surviving, you are finally evolving." Let us dissect the psychology behind that text. Luca operates with the gravity of a man who controls the board. He reveals he orchestrated the arrangement because he refuses to let Arya's time be wasted. We watch her spiral into a beautiful contradiction, profoundly grateful yet furious at him pulling the strings. She fires back, demanding he stop managing her life. Luca's counter is brutally poetic. He replies that he merely unlocks the doors. Walking through them is her burden alone. She types a reluctant thank you. Instantly, he commands her to join him for dinner tonight. She hesitates, trembling as the boundaries between protector and something darker begin to blur. The ultimate lesson is beautifully clear. The most terrifying thresholds we ever cross are the ones leading straight into a fiercely guarded heart. The clock strikes. Luca leaves zero room for negotiation. We watch Arya tear through her closet for agonizing hours, trembling hands rejecting dress after dress. She finally settles into quiet armor, tailored black trousers, and a dark silk blouse. Down on the curb, a massive sedan idles. Luca sits perfectly still, swallowed by the backseat shadows. As she slides inside, his voice drops to a gravelly murmur, telling her she looks beautiful. She tries to brush it away, but he holds his ground, insisting the truth remains whether she accepts it or not. The streetlights bleed red across the tinted glass as they drive. It serves as a quiet, powerful reminder. Finding the right person to sit beside can instantly turn a crushing, chaotic city into a perfectly safe sanctuary. When she asks where they are going, Luca promises somewhere safe. The frantic city fades as they pull up to a hidden bistro tucked beside an old bookstore. Inside, a warm golden glow spills over mismatched vintage chairs. The owner greets this terrifying syndicate boss by his first name, guiding them to an isolated booth. Arya studies his face, asking if he comes here often. Luca stares down at the scarred wooden table. He confesses he used to come here to think, but now, he only brings the rare few he refuses to wear his brutal mask around. He is handing her the keys to his innermost sanctuary. It is a vital truth we all must learn. The highest level of trust is finding someone who lets you drop the heavy act. Loving the real you behind closed doors. I are about to watch this tragedy deepen. Arya sits across from the undisputed crime boss of the city, completely disarmed by the aching gentleness in his eyes. She hides her trembling hands behind the menu as drinks arrive. Dark wine for her. Neat whiskey for him. The amber liquid. Luca asks about the New York deal. Arya finally drops her guard, her voice cracking as she admits her absolute terror. She fears if she fails, everyone will say she only succeeded through his dark influence. Luca stares her down with cold, unyielding clarity. He tells her to let the cowards whisper, because her undeniable success will soon choke them into silence. Remember this enduring truth. The heaviest chains we ever drag through our lives are always the ones we quietly forge in our own doubting minds. He leans back into the dim shadows, studying her with hollow eyes that carry the toll of brutal street wars. He tells her she is burning her spirit on the wrong battles, urging her to focus on the work and block out the noise. Arya looks practically dead on her feet, exhaustion hanging heavy in her slumped shoulders. She quietly asks if he thinks any of this is easy. The boss responds with a devastating reality check. For a decade, he built his empire on pure fear, sacrificing loyal friends while trying to impress old money elites who secretly despised him. The tragedy of his existence is painted across his tired face. Even sitting at the absolute top of the city, he still feels like a total outcast. The hardest cages to escape are always the ones we build ourselves just to feel safe in an unforgiving world. Consider the midnight hour, that fragile space where true confessions finally spill. Arya absorbs his words, while Luca stares into his whiskey, like a tragic philosopher reading the stars. The turning point of his life, he reveals softly, was the day he stopped waiting for anyone's permission. He stopped bowing to arrogant elites who viewed him as nothing but a violent thug. Choosing to trust his own instincts against all odds, he understands a vital, painful lesson. Playing it perfectly safe is the fastest way to lose your true self. When he took a heavy loss, he simply absorbed the agony and evolved faster than his enemies. The thick tension between them slowly evaporates, leaving Arya with a rare peace. Emboldened by this intimate stillness, she finally finds the courage to ask about his darkest chapter. The instant she speaks Isabel's name, the air turns freezing cold. Luca does not raise a physical wall, but the shadows in his eyes grow incredibly dark. He delivers a shocking twist to his tragic history. Isabel actually reached out a year after her brutal betrayal, crying and begging for forgiveness. He sat in pure silence, let her finish weeping, and then calmly hung up the phone. It is a chilling display of self-preservation. People rarely apologize to heal the wounds they inflicted. They usually do it just to wash away their own guilt. Arya shivers, haunted by the memory of Marcus and his pathetic voicemails. When she asks if Luca regrets shutting her out, his denial is absolute. He refused to be the medicine for her guilty conscience. You never owe closure to the person who willingly broke your heart. Luca freely admits his actions were brutal, but the absolute truth is rarely soft. The dinner plates vanish into the shadows, replaced by heavy mugs of black coffee. Arya grips the warm ceramic like a lifeline, desperate to stay grounded. She confesses a deep jealousy over how effortlessly he commanded the wealthy crowd at the gala, wishing she possessed even a fraction of his impenetrable armor. Luca softly, almost tragically, shatters her illusion. He tells her she already wears that armor, but she argues hers is completely fake. Here is a lesson we must take away. Confidence is often nothing more than a desperate survival tactic. Luca leans closer, revealing that every single elite in that ballroom was faking it. Power is merely the dark art of convincing the world you hold it, and then believing the lie yourself. For the first time, we notice the faint, bitter lines of exhaustion framing Luca's dark eyes. It is that profound fatigue you only recognize when you truly begin to care for someone. Arya softly asks if constantly playing this ruthless monster ever drains his spirit dry. The silence that follows is heavy, loaded with years of unspoken regrets. Finally, the boss confesses that the burnout eats at his bones every single day. There is a terrifying realization that hits us all eventually. The hardest tragedy in life is spending years building a version of yourself that you no longer respect in the mirror. To quit now means facing that bitter reality, and his pride refuses to surrender just yet. Stunned by his raw humanity, she follows him out into the freezing night air to walk off the weight of these heavy truths. You and I know walking through an empty city at midnight strips away. All remaining defenses, they drift down the silent pavement, washed in the yellow glow of street lamps. Without warning, Luca cuts to the infected root of her trauma, bringing up her toxic mother and sister. The painful truth is, you can never truly outrun the pull of your own blood. Arya stops, confessing her spirit is fractured. Half of her burns with violent rage over the betrayal, while the other half just wants to fade away. She understands now with tragic clarity that her mother will always elevate Caroline above her. It is a devastating pill to swallow, realizing you were never the cherished child. Luca stops beside her, locking eyes as he asks the ultimate question. Will she actually lay down and let her sister steal the victory without a fight? Feels entirely trapped, asking what move she even has left in this nightmare. Luca stops dead under the flickering streetlights. He tells her she holds every choice in the palm of her trembling hand. We are all the authors of our own stories. Handing someone else the pen is a fatal mistake you can never afford to make. She has the power to fight back, walk away, or forgive, but she cannot cower in the shadows while they dictate her reality. When Arya confesses she does not know how to fight, he reminds her how she conquered the room at the gala. She whispers she only survived because he was her shield. The fear of abandonment is a heavy, drowning anchor. She admits she is terrified he will eventually leave her in ruins. He promises to stand by her side, but her trauma demands proof before she can believe him. He locks his dark eyes with hers, projecting a fierce confidence that commands the quiet street. He states plainly, he never does anything halfway, and absolutely refuses to waste time on people he does not fully believe in. When Arya meets his gaze, his unmasked honesty actually terrifies her. Consider this deep psychological truth. Genuine connection is far scarier than isolation, because it demands you step into the light without your protective armor. Her voice trembles as she asks what he expects from her. His voice drops into a low, authoritative cadence. He wants her to stop apologizing for taking up space, to end the constant second-guessing, and to trust her own intuition. It is a monumental task to unlearn a lifetime of making yourself small to please others. He offers a slow, rare smile, telling her she is already rising to the challenge. Pause and really feel this moment together. You and I, the midnight air is heavy with an unspoken truth. Neither Arya nor Luca is willing to voice just yet. But that fragile silence shatters the exact moment her phone begins to vibrate. A relentless alarm dragging her back to harsh reality. Against her better judgment, she looks at the screen. It is Caroline. Her sister is weaponizing their shared history, flooding the glass with desperate, manipulative apologies. Arya feels the familiar, suffocating grip of old panic close around her throat. Luca watches the color drain from her face, his jaw tightening at the mere thought of her family. It is a harsh truth we all must face eventually. Sometimes the people who share our blood are the ones most perfectly equipped to bleed us dry. He watches her in the tense quiet, waiting to see if she will step back into the trap. Notice how the light in this scene barely touches Arya. The past crashes into her, flooding the frame with memories of childhood secrets. But make no mistake, nostalgia is a brilliant liar, painting over the rotting wood of a collapsed foundation. The camera lingers on her trembling fingers as she visualizes Caroline standing unapologetic in the wreckage. To walk away from your own blood is an agonizing death of the spirit, yet watch her eyes as she makes the brutal choice for peace. The phone screen goes dark, severing the bond. Luca stands in the shadows, offering only a slow, silent nod of respect. It reveals a quiet truth we all must eventually face. Letting go is rarely an explosive climax. It is simply a silent decision to stop bleeding for those who hold the knife. Contrast in this framing is vital to the tragedy. Through the glass, the city bleeds in a chaotic smear of neon, while Luca escorts her to the door like a dark, unyielding sentinel. When she whispers her gratitude, a faint, melancholic smile softens his hardened features. He reminds her, his voice a low rumble, that her resilience is vast. We see her step inside, and the apartment immediately swallows her in a suffocating silence without him. Desperate to banish the isolation, she bathes the room in harsh light, pours tea that will soon turn cold, and forces her laptop open. The obsessive hustle becomes her sanctuary. This quiet moment carries a vital lesson for anyone standing in the ruins of betrayal. When profound loss threatens to shatter your mind, actively building your own future is the only anchor you have left to keep from drowning. The camera tightens on Arya, bathed in the unforgiving glare of her screen. She is drafting a message meant to burn her family home to the ground. Every keystroke is a heavy drop of venom. Her mother needs to know that Caroline and Marcus did not make a simple mistake. They made a cold, calculated choice to betray her for 6 agonizing months. She types that she will no longer be the sacrificial lamb upon the altar of family harmony. But watch the subtle shift in her posture. The tight tension in her shoulders slowly releases. She stares at the devastating weapon she just forged, exhales a shaky breath, and deletes every single letter. It is a masterclass in human restraint, teaching us an invaluable lesson. True power is never about dropping the bomb. Real strength is holding the absolute power to destroy someone and simply choosing to walk away in peace. Then plunging back into the toxic wasteland of her bloodline, Arya vanishes completely into her art. We see her pushing deep into the solitary hours of the night, obsessing over the stark concepts for her new commission. For 3 relentless weeks, her photography is the only breathing reality she permits herself to touch. Throughout this dark period, Luca operates as her silent guardian. His brief messages asking if she has eaten become a lifeline. She hoards these fragmented moments of care, clinging to his fierce loyalty as her single remaining truth. But the narrative arc demands a reckoning. The camera slowly zooms in as the fragile silence of her studio shatters. The phone vibrates across the desk. It reminds us of a bitter, unavoidable truth. You can bury the pain under a mountain of ambition, but eventually your ghosts will always wake up and demand an audience. Stares at the glowing screen as if it were a live grenade. Every survival instinct screams at her to let it ring. Yet a tragic, lingering fragment of a daughter's hope forces her to accept the call. Her mother's voice cracks through the speaker, weeping a hollow apology while desperately claiming ignorance of the grand betrayal. Arya listens, her expression hardening into cold stone. She refuses to play the bleeding victim any longer. She ruthlessly tears down the older woman's fragile facade. When her mother hysterically begs to keep the family whole, Arya delivers the fatal blow with terrifying calm. She states that their family has been dead for years. The line goes dead. It is a harsh but necessary life lesson for all of us. An apology wrapped in willful ignorance is just another form of manipulation, and sometimes, toxic bonds are simply better left resting in the grave. Let us look at this tragic aftermath together, shall we? The silence following that confrontation is dense enough to shatter bone. Her mother had poured out desperate, trembling excuses, trying to pave over the horrific reality that she left her own daughter to face the knife alone. Through the lens, you can almost see the dark poison of lifelong resentment finally bleeding out of Arya's veins. There is no sweeping. Tearful moment of forgiveness here, and there shouldn't be. Her mother is rightfully abandoned in the desolate ruins of her own failures. When a guilt-driven invitation to dinner is whispered, Arya dismisses it with ice. This scene captures a profound reality of the human condition. Forgiveness is not some magical eraser that resets the past. We must learn that true healing is often just surviving the bitter ache day by day, until the memory simply stops bleeding. This is how the lighting shifts as the call ends. There is no triumphant swell of music, but the suffocating weight in the room has fractured. The narrative cuts to the eve of her departure. Luca sums her into his private sanctuary. She expects a sterile fortress, but steps into a space heavy with rich mahogany and warm sunlight. It reveals the complex soul buried beneath his ruthless reputation. The atmosphere hums with unspoken tension as he gestures her forward. Without breaking eye contact, he slides a thick, unmarked envelope across the polished wood. It is a massive sum, enough to entirely rewrite her destiny. It offers a haunting lesson for our own lives. The greatest life leaps rarely come from the family we were born into. More often than not, salvation extends from the unexpected, calloused hands that willingly choose to reach out and catch us when we fall. Just feel the suffocating gravity of this frame. $20,000 lies on the desk, and Arya's defensive armor instantly slams shut. Her eyes narrow, demanding to know his true motive, desperately searching for the hook hidden in the bait. But Luca leans back, unfazed to him. This is not charity. It all heavy ammunition for the brutal war waiting in New York. She fiercely tries to push the envelope back, but he dismantles her stubborn pride with a low, steady voice. He has watched her bleed for scraps, and now he intends to watch her reign. When she desperately vows to repay every cent, his only demand is that she build a legacy bright enough to outshine his own dark history. It is a profound truth we must all confront. The absolute hardest challenge for a broken, independent soul is simply learning to let someone else carry the heavy burden of their survival. The camera catches a microscopic softening in his jawline. It is a subtle shift that dismantles the terrifying syndicate boss, exposing the fiercely protective man underneath. He chuckles, calling her impossible. She deflects the sudden emotional weight by throwing the exact word right back at him. For one fragile, suspended beat, they share a breathless silence. Then, his tone drops. He asks if she is truly ready to face the ruthless machinery of the city. We watch her eyes darken as she remembers the deep betrayals that murdered her innocence. She openly confesses her terror, yet her spine remains perfectly straight. It highlights a vital lesson for anyone standing on the edge of greatness. Courage is never the magical absence of fear. True bravery is making the choice to step straight into the dark unknown, even while your hands are violently trembling. Words fail her entirely. She gives one heavy nod and steps out of his shadow. The director cuts sharply. By sunrise, she is suspended in the clouds, flanked by elite camera gear, and a contract that will sever her from her old life yet. Notice the profound grief in her posture. She is suffering the vertigo of standing between a locked door and a gaping abyss. It reminds us of a bitter reality. Elevating your existence always carries the dark, mournful weight of burying your past self. Her arrival in the city hits like a physical assault. The rushing energy of millions of strangers threatens to crush her lungs. She retreats to a cold, impersonal hotel room. It is a sterile purgatory, but it teaches an essential lesson. Before you can ever conquer the outside world, you must first learn how to survive the crushing, deafening weight of your own absolute solitude. You and I have probably both felt this exact, suffocating paralysis. Arya is stranded above the concrete labyrinth, physically crushed by the magnitude of the impossible task. Suddenly a sharp chime breaks the silence. Luca. A tether pulling her back from the ledge. When she types out her spiraling panic, his response is a razor-sharp blade cutting through the dark. He tells her that fear is not weakness. It is just visceral proof that the outcome deeply matters. It is a profound truth we must cling to when doubt creeps in. This commission is a brutal gauntlet of 8 elite subjects in 3 merciless days. We see her channel that terror into manic preparation, studying dossiers until her vision blurs. The lesson here is written in her exhausted eyes. True dedication requires willingly walking through the flames of your own anxiety to finally claim the reality that belongs to you. Automatic clock ticks past midnight. Arya forces down cold hotel food, but sleep is an absolute impossibility. The mattress feels like concrete, and the endless sirens only feed the manic static in her brain, surrendering to the fever of insomnia. She grips her camera like a weapon and descends into the belly of the city. New York at 2 a.m. is a feral beast. It is stripped of its corporate makeup, bleeding with unapologetic grit. The lens tracks her as she walks until her heels blister. Capturing the broken poetry of the streets, she frames the exhausted phantoms hovering over steam vents, their faces painted by the sickly glow of sodium lights. It is a beautiful, tragic metaphor for our own lives. Sometimes, to figure out what you are truly looking for, you must stop chasing the sun. True clarity is almost always forged in the darkest, most terrifying shadows. Let us look at this opening frame together. The camera lingers on Arya, a fragile silhouette against the freezing dawn. At precisely 6:30, the sharp ring of the phone shatters the stillness. Elaine, crisp, unforgiving, the car is waiting. In the harsh fluorescent glare of the bathroom mirror, Arya stares at a hollow-eyed ghost, fueled entirely by caffeine and unadulterated spite. But in a brutal world designed to grind the weak into dust, spite can forge the strongest armor. Arriving at the Brooklyn Gallery, Elaine stands at the iron doors like a towering sentinel. Their handshake is no greeting. It is a cold, tactile interrogation. It reveals a simple, necessary truth: the world will always try to shrink you. But only you can give it permission to break your spine. The air in the cavernous studio feels heavy. Elaine mentions Luca and his glowing praise, yet her voice drips with frost. Arya tries to deflect, shifting her weight, but Elaine's gaze is piercing. She warns that Luca is notoriously lethal in his judgments, demanding Arya prove her worth. The subject today is Maya Chen, a ruthless tech titan who clawed up a mountain of corporate wreckage. Maya steps into the stark studio lighting, precisely at 9, her bespoke suit clinging to her like impenetrable armor. The tension in the room instantly suffocates. Yet, beneath the severe line of Maya's jaw, there is a flicker of exhaustion. It teaches us a vital lesson. True power is often nothing more than the practiced ability to hide your deepest, bleeding scars behind a flawless mask. The camera frames Maya, taking her seat with a chilling, practiced grace. She projects polite warmth, but her eyes remain empty. She speaks in perfectly sculpted sentences that offer nothing, her posture rigged tight for public consumption. The initial shutter clicks produce flawless, hollow images. Sensing the failure, Arya lowers the heavy lens and does the unthinkable. She asks the one forbidden question: why are you actually doing this? The lighting catches the microscopic second Maya's titanium smile finally fractures. The exhaustion bleeding through her trembling lip is violently human. It forces a heavy realization upon us. No matter how magnificent a person's armor may appear, every single human being is fighting a silent, desperate war behind closed doors. Stick with me, because this is where the illusion collapses. Arya holds her ground. Maya has the wealth and the covers, so I fabricate a lie of spiritual harmony. The sprawling studio falls agonizingly silent. Maya lets out a hollow, bitter laugh, her hands trembling as she admits her team forced the relatable act. Then Arya drops the blade, asking if that human version of Maya even exists anymore. Under the harsh lights, the Titan physically caves in, shoulders collapsing. She whispers that she traded her very soul for this cold empire. The conqueror is gone, leaving only a hostage. It is a tragic, undeniable warning. When you sacrifice your own peace to conquer the world, the magnificent kingdom you build will inevitably become your permanent prison. Confession spills into the quiet room like dark water from a shattered dam. Maya's chest heaves. She has survived on 4 hours of sleep, a night for 3 agonizing years, and crushed under the terrifying weight of 200 lives depending on her. The shutter clicks like a heartbeat, capturing the stark terror in her eyes. When Arya softly asks why she doesn't walk away, Maya's voice breaks. She admits her darkest fear: without this agonizing crown, she is absolutely nothing. For an hour, the lens acts as a confessional, peeling back the armor to find the weeping soul underneath. The tragedy of blind ambition bleeds into every frame. It reminds us of a bitter reality. Our proudest achievements are so often just heavy metal shields, desperately hiding how utterly exhausted we truly are. The session ends, and Maya discards her stiff blazer, her face softened by the profound relief of being truly seen. The afternoon blurs into a beautiful procession of damaged souls, a mother binding her shattered family with bleeding willpower, a ruined athlete searching for an identity beyond the roar of the crowd, a writer drowning in decades of cold rejection. Every single one hauls an invisible mountain of terror, Yet they surrender their heavy armor to the quiet click of the camera. When the final guest vanishes into the dark street, Arya's body aches, but her mind is crystalline. It illuminates a forgotten truth sometimes. The absolute best way to heal the deep wounds inside your own chest is to build a quiet sanctuary where others can finally drop their masks. The shadows stretch across the empty studio before Elaine emerges. Her voice is a velvet blade, demanding the raw files by sunrise without a single margin for failure. Yet a flicker of respect crosses her eyes. She admits she expected the weight of this city to snap Arya in half today. Arya tosses an exhausted smile, but Elaine's chilling aura remains untouched. She knows Luca was right about the photographer's iron grit, but triumph is a ghost. The second Arya steps into the sterile silence of her hotel room, the real world violently crashes down. Her phone screen burns calls from her estranged mother, Lukica, and a toxic shadow of her past. It proves a bitter reality. Escaping into your art is easy, but eventually, you must always face the devastating wreckage waiting for you in the dark. Let's unpack this moment together. Arya dials his number, gripping the phone as if it might shatter in her trembling hand. Luca answers, his deep voice instantly anchoring her soul. He asks how she survived the flames. She exhales, admitting it was terrifying, yet undeniably brilliant. When he warns her of Elena's demands, Arya laughs, confessing she is already drowning in them. Luca's warm laughter spills through the receiver, melting the ice in her chest. They talk for hours about this merciless city, how it either forges you into steel or grinds your bones to dust. You and I have likely felt that exact relief, when the universe is violently spinning off its axis once steady. Familiar voice is all it takes to remind you that your feet are still planted on solid ground. Third morning, the tension in the gallery is thick enough to choke on. Elaine sits in punishing silence, scanning the raw images, the quiet stretches into an agonizing eternity. Finally, the director leans back. She whispers that these photographs are not merely good, they are violently, staggeringly brilliant. The iron band crushing Arya's lungs snaps. She tries to stammer her gratitude, but Elaine slices the air with her hand, demanding Arya own her victory. She bled for every frame. Then, she slides a massive 3-month contract across the table. Arya sits completely paralyzed. It illustrates exactly how true salvation arrives. It rarely comes with loud fireworks. It happens in deadly quiet rooms. The exact second you finally accept your own undeniable worth. She manages to breathe a yes, her pulse hammering against her ribs. Wandering the concrete canyon, she reaches the freezing woods of Central Park and collapses onto a bench. Suddenly, her phone buzzes like a rattlesnake. Marcus. Her toxic ex purchased a new number just to bypass her blockades. The primal urge to scream, to unleash years of buried rage, burns in her throat. But look closely at the psychology of a parasite with me. Toxic people survive entirely by feeding on your frantic emotional reaction. Screaming back only proves they hold power. Knowing this, Arya chooses the ultimate strike. She deletes the message without a word, turns the screen black, and lets the devastating silence be her only reply. True closure is simply the radical choice to never engage again. We are about to see what happens when you finally stop running. Arya retreats into a dimly lit Italian restaurant hidden from the brutal city. The flickering candles and heavy shadows create the perfect sanctuary. A waiter silently slides a glass of blood-red wine onto her table. Her eyes dart toward the mahogany bar. Luca, framed in amber light, dressed in an immaculate suit. He looks like a king surveying his empire. With a slow nod, she calls him over. He slides into the leather booth, lying with absolute ease about having random business in town. It is a stunning, deliberate fiction. It captures what true loyalty looks like in the dark. The right people will cross entire continents just to make sure you survived the blast, all while pretending it was a complete coincidence. Let us examine this frame together. Luca leans into the candlelight, asking how she is holding up. Arya traces the rim of her glass, confessing she feels like she crawled out of a trench, yet Elaine is dragging her into a new war. Luca flashes a slow, knowing smirk. He already knew. Arya's spine stiffens, her defenses flare as she demands to know why he really came. The heavy silence that follows dismantles her iron walls. He softly admits he could not stand the thought of her celebrating a massive victory in a lonely, empty room. Arya's throat tightens. For a soldier who spends her life on high alert, the most terrifying thing is letting someone else take the watch while she rests. It teaches us a vital lesson. You do not have to fight every single battle in the dark, entirely by yourself. His voice cuts the ambient noise, detailing a corporate merger ruined because 2 executives refused to share the same boardroom air. Arya counters, describing the exact frame her boss Maya shed her iron armor, exposing the fragile human beneath. Luca studies her, noting that exhuming buried secrets is her quiet superpower. Later, beneath the bleeding neon of Times Square, Luca glares at the crowds, muttering his disdain for a city built on artificial personas. Arya tilts her head, reminding him that he engineers his own illusions every single day. The profound truth of our existence is that we all carry the heavy weight of these masks, and we only dare to drop them when we finally find a soul safe enough to witness our raw, unfiltered faces. Luca goes rigid, his voice sharpening into a defensive blade. He insists the ruthless boss is a character, reserved strictly for closed doors. Arya stops on the pavement, looking right through his polished facade. She asks softly if he ever lets anyone see the man entirely stripped of the psychological chess game. Luca turns slowly, locking his dark eyes onto hers. He tells her he is letting her see him right now. In that singular moment, the chaotic roar of the city completely evaporates. He breaks the heavy stare, whispering that they need to move. Back at her hotel, she tries to thank him for standing by her, but he simply exhales a heavy sigh. When someone steps into the dark to shield you, offering polite gratitude is often just another defensive wall. The ultimate lesson is finding the courage to simply accept their shelter. He steps forward, pulling her into a solid embrace. With me here to set the scene. This was not some polite, casual pat on the back. Luca wraps Arya up like a heavy iron anchor against the freezing wind. Her frame turns rigid in pure shock before she finally shatters and caves into his warmth. When he pulls away, the cinematic ice in his eyes has completely melted. He tells her she did something truly incredible, demanding she never let Marcus steal her hard-earned victory. Hours later, pacing her shadowed hotel room, she stares at the glowing laptop screen. Every single face in those raw photographs screams pure, unfiltered truth. Here is the lesson we must all face. You only begin to genuinely heal the second you stop running away and choose to own your absolute power. But precisely as that quiet peace settles over the room, the stillness shatters. Her phone buzzes violently on the wooden nightstand. It is Marcus. The glowing text from Marcus is heavy with sheer audacity. He claims he knows she does not want to hear his voice, but cowardly admits she deserved better. Years ago, a message like this would have destroyed her world. Now, Arya does not even blink. Her thumbs fly across the cold glass screen. She tells him he is exactly right, she does deserve better, and commands him to never contact her again. Blocked and deleted in one swift motion. The erotic past is finally severed. The following morning, flying thousands of feet above the earth, she is no longer running like a wounded victim. She is stepping firmly into her own authority. The truth is, genuine growth is never a gentle process. It is the absolute fire you have to walk through to forge a brand new spine. She lands at the airport. Finding Luca has already sent his dark sedan a quiet show of respect. Moving into her apartment feels surreal, like wandering through a museum of her former life. The faded furniture is identical, but her internal landscape has violently shifted. She slumps at her desk, just as an email from Elaine drops onto the screen. Attached are the final selects. Her name will roll in the credits next month. Arya clicks the folder, her hands trembling as she stares at 12 breathtaking portraits. She actually pulled the impossible off. Right on cue. The phone rings. It is Luca. Skipping the polite small talk, he simply asks if she saw the email. She whispers that she does not even know what to say. Luca replies with his steady gravity, telling her to just feel it. Life teaches us many things, but giving yourself permission to actually sit and feel your own victory is often the absolute bravest choice you can make. The profound pride washing over her in this dimly lit room is staggering. She bet her entire battered soul on this creative risk, and somehow won. She quietly thanks Luca for believing in her vision, before she even understood the vicious rules of the game. His voice drops into a dark, steady rumble. He explains that this is simply what he does. He spots the quiet, buried potential people hide away, and waits in the shadows for them to realize it themselves. They stay on the line, shifting to the looming anxiety of the holidays, debating whether she should finally face her estranged mother. Luca offers a striking piece of wisdom. He tells her to do what is true, not what merely keeps the fragile peace. If you do not know what that truth is yet, just wait. The lesson here is vital. Clarity never arrives when you are desperately rushing to appease everyone else around you. All ends, and the quiet of her apartment finally feels like a sanctuary. Arya looks back at the raw, unflinching portraits glowing on her monitor. She is actively laying her oldest ghost to rest. The toxic shadow of Marcus is gone. The bitter rivalry with Caroline is dead, and that fragile, pending apology from her mother. The terrified young woman who used to shrink away from family conflict has vanished. Arya opens a blank message and types out a firm, incredibly clean boundary. She explains she is not ready to see Caroline, but she is willing to meet her mother completely alone. We spend so much of our fleeting lives waiting for the perfect apology from the people who broke us. But the brutal truth is, sometimes drawing a permanent line in the cold sand is the exact closure we need to finally move forward. She hits send, locking her hard-earned peace into place. Lets out a trembling breath and dives straight back into the glow of her work. You and I both know the brutal reality of outgrowing your own past. It is never a clean, cinematic process. 2 agonizing days drag by before her phone screen lights up. The message from her mother is overwhelmingly cautious, completely stripped of the usual family guilt. She agrees to come over on Saturday, just the 2 of them. Arya reads the text 3 separate times, scanning the words for a hidden trapdoor. Conditioned by years of trauma to expect sudden betrayal, but there is nothing there. It is a genuine olive branch. She sends a brief confirmation for 2 o'clock. The waiting period becomes pure psychological torture. Healing is incredibly strange that way. It forces you to sit patiently in the uncomfortable quiet until you are finally strong enough to face what is waiting in the dark. Let us explore the desperate ways we try to outrun our own ghosts. Picture Arya glued to her glowing monitor in the dead of night. She is obsessively editing those portraits to prove to herself she is no longer a bleeding victim. Luca calls her twice during the week. They discuss obscure films, carefully dodging the heavy emotional weight suffocating the room. She eventually breaks, admitting she is running on empty, just to outpace the rising tide of panic. Luca calls her out immediately, asking if she is truly rebuilding her shattered life, or just dodging incoming bullets. The raw truth is that staying constantly in motion is often a brilliant trick to keep from completely falling apart. By Friday night, Arya is scrubbing already spotless floors and violently rearranging heavy furniture past midnight, forcing her hands to keep moving so her mind cannot wander into the dark. She finally collapses onto the couch, staring around her surgically clean apartment, searching the shadows for any sense of calm. Saturday arrives, freezing cold and draped in miserable gray light. Arya burns her breakfast, throws the blackened mess away, and downs a burning cup of bitter coffee. She changes her clothes 3 different times as if preparing for a tactical mission, pretending she is perfectly fine, while her heart hammers a violent rhythm against her ribs. Right at 2 o'clock, her mother's car pulls up to the curb. Arya watches through the blinds as her mom steps out, clutching her leather purse like physical body armor. She looks devastatingly fragile, worn down by decades of silent tension. A profound lesson becomes clear here. The absolute most intimidating strangers you will ever face are often the very people who raised you. Arya pulls the heavy door open. Her mother freezes on the welcome mat before leaning in for a stiff, incredibly brittle hug. She holds Arya delicately, as if embracing a live explosive bound to detonate. Arya hugs her in return, feeling that tragic collision of something deeply familiar and entirely alien. She invites her inside, and her mother scans the dim living room like a nervous traveler, seeking an exit. They sit across from one another at the small kitchen table. Arya pours 2 steaming cups of tea, simply to give her trembling hands a task. Knowing full well neither will drink a single drop, she quietly thanks her mom for coming. Her mother just grips the ceramic mug, staring blankly into the dark liquid. The reality of human connection is stark and unyielding. The absolute heaviest, most transformative conversations of your entire life will almost always begin with a crushing, suffocating silence. We are going to unpack this heavy moment together. Arya plainly tells her mother she never expected her to show up. Her mom softly admits she was not sure she would either. When asked how she has been, Arya keeps her emotional shields raised, offering a brief, clinical update about the photography shoot. Then comes the cinematic twist. Her mother reveals that her father saw the raw photos online. He is genuinely proud of her, even if he remains too cowardly to say the words himself. That sudden revelation hits Arya like a physical blow, instantly shattering her carefully built defenses. Her mother takes a shaky, ragged breath and delivers a bombshell. She offers a raw, unfiltered apology, admitting aloud that she completely failed her daughter. True healing is never easy. It only begins the exact second someone finally has the courage to look you in the eyes and admit they were wrong. Finally shatters, and the bitter truth spills across the dimly lit room. Her mother's voice trembles, admitting that when Arya desperately needed a protector, she chose the hollow comfort of a fake peace. She thought she was holding their fragile world together, But she was merely dodging the crossfire while her daughter took every brutal hit. Paralyzed by the terror of confronting Caroline, she simply froze. Arya stares back through the shadows, her eyes holding a heavy ache of silent agreement. Her mother does not ask for forgiveness. She only wants Arya to know she finally sees the massive wreckage she left behind. It is a harsh lesson for everyone. Choosing a comfortable illusion over a hard reality will always destroy the very people you care about the most. Arya swipes a hand across her pale face, shocked to feel her own tears. She breathes out the heavy question that has haunted her for years. Why did you never say this before? Her mother breaks down, shoulders shaking under the weight of her confession. She admits she was too busy forcing everyone into a suffocating normal. By covering up every mess, she taught Caroline she was untouchable, and tragically taught Arya her own feelings were worthless. She built an empire where the toxic person always won, and now she must live in its ruins. Arya just stares at the broken woman across the table. We all must face this bitter reality. The loudest demands will always drown out quiet needs, right up until the foundation cracks and the entire house falls apart. Look at this together, shall we? This is the shift we have been waiting for. Arya walked in braced for the usual empty excuses. Instead, she gets hit with raw accountability. Arya asks about Caroline, keeping her voice quiet in the tense air. Her mother gets this absolute steel in her weary eyes. She admits she finally confronted her, and Caroline is losing her mind. Arya hits back with a cold statement that it is good she is upset. Her mother drops the hammer, declaring she is done playing the middleman. No more forced holiday forgiveness. It is powerful to watch someone finally step up. Real growth always demands this exact kind of firm boundary. You must stop shielding destructive people from the painful consequences of their own actions. The tension in the room is thick enough to cut. You can physically see the iron knot inside Arya start to unravel. She whispers into the dim light, asking if her mother actually dropped that bomb. Her mother confirms it without blinking. Caroline hated the truth, but that is her own problem now. Outside, the city screams with sirens, oblivious to the emotional repair happening at this tiny table. Arya keeps her posture grounded. She honestly admits she does not know if she can ever forgive either of them yet. She demands total loyalty. Her mother must back her up, not just keep the fake peace. This brings a stark realization. Real loyalty means standing right inside the fire with the person who got burned, instead of hushing them up to keep everyone else perfectly comfortable. Her mother looks her dead in the eye and promises she has her word, but Arya refuses the easy bait. She stares right through her, dropping the coldest truth by reminding her that words are incredibly cheap. Her mother takes the brutal hit, simply telling Arya to watch her actions instead. For the next hour, the heavy tragedy lifts. They discuss the quiet art of photography, and share a warm laugh about her father fighting a stubborn porch light. It feels like a fleeting window into the days before this family drama exploded. When her mother leaves, they share a long, genuine embrace. Obviously, the deep scars remain, but as Arya collapses on the dark couch, a massive weight finally lifts off her chest. Sometimes, simply wanting to believe someone is trying to change is a solid enough foundation to start rebuilding your peace of mind. Arya sits alone, soaking in heavy grief mixed with a fragile hope that she can fix her fractured life. Right on cue, her phone buzzes. It is Luca, checking to see if she survived the emotional bloodbath. She texts back that it went better than expected, but left her entirely drained. Luca tells her to turn her racing brain off and not try to solve the universe tonight. A genuine smile tugs at Arya's lips, and she hits him with a surprise invite for a Sunday drive. The next morning, she rolls up in her father's busted old sedan. Luca folds his tall frame into the passenger seat, staring at the cracked dashboard in pure horror. He asks if this junker is really her ride. She warns him not to judge, and the easy banter flows. Life proves that the absolute best healers are the ones who make us laugh, right after a massive emotional breakdown. They roast each other as they leave the heavy concrete city behind, driving deep into the quiet countryside. Luca is visibly stressing. The man hates not being in control, fidgeting as he begs to know their destination. Arya leans into the mystery, a playful smirk on her face as she refuses to drop a hint. Finally, the tires crunch onto a gravel lot next to a huge, battered old barn. A wooden sign reads Westfield Art Collective. Luca stares at this dusty setup like they just landed on another planet, asking what the deal is. Arya kills the engine, staring dead ahead through the dirty windshield. She quietly admits this is exactly where she used to go before her entire life imploded. It is a harsh but necessary reality. Sometimes you have to go back and face the ghost of who you used to be, just to figure out who you desperately need to become. With me here, because context is everything. This sanctuary represents the golden era before Marcus ruined her confidence, and long before she forgot her raw talent. They push open the heavy barn doors, hit with the comforting scent of sawdust. Wet oil paint and dark coffee. The shadowed walls are covered in chaotic local art in mismatched frames. Sitting behind a messy desk is Ruth, a fierce older woman holding a battered paperback. Ruth locks her intense eyes on Arya and roasts her without missing a beat, joking about how she finally remembered her roots. She marches over and crushes Arya in a massive hug smelling of lavender and old cigarettes, teasing her for going Hollywood. This shows that your true passion never actually dies. It just waits patiently in the dusty corners of your past until you are brave enough to come back home. How this scene unfolds. Ruth turns her intense gaze onto Luca, hitting him with that brutal assessment only tough older women can pull off. She demands to know who he is. Arya introduces him, hyping Ruth up as the legend who taught her photography. Ruth fires back that Arya clearly forgot those lessons, a warm grin breaking through her exterior. After shaking Luca's hand, Ruth's tone gets surprisingly soft. She quietly reveals she kept all of Arya's old artwork hanging in the back corner. Admitting she never had the heart to take it down, Arya visibly chokes up, blindsided by this unexpected loyalty. Ruth waves them toward the dusty light, ready to show Luca the magic Arya used to create. It proves your true legacy is always protected by the people who loved you, long before you wore a fake mask for the rest of the world. Step into this dusty back room together, where her literal past hangs in stark black and white. 6 striking photographs Arya snapped 3 years ago are pinned to the rough wooden wall. We are talking about gritty local faces, a tired farmer, an exhausted diner waitress, a greasy mechanic. These are the everyday people you and I would probably walk right past, but she captured their raw souls with brutal honesty. Luca stands totally frozen, staring silently at the wall. He mutters into the quiet room that these shots are seriously heavy and completely holed up. Ruth snorts from her desk, feeling totally vindicated. The real tragedy is that Arya spent years chasing hollow validation in the city, blind to her own talent. The hardest thing in the world is recognizing your own true value when you are too busy, begging for a toxic crowd's empty applause. The massive barn goes completely silent, save for the old wood groaning. Luca turns to her, his eyes locked intensely on hers, and asks the golden question. Why did she bring him out here? Arya lets out a heavy sigh that carries years of regret. She needed him to see her true origin story. She wanted him to understand who she was before she twisted herself into a fake socialite to survive Marcus' toxic world. She literally sold her soul for a seat at a table full of snakes. Luca turns slowly, and the vibe in the room shifts hard. He asks if she knows the real reason he kept picking up her calls and bailing her out of drama. His voice catches when he admits she reminded him of a piece of himself he buried years ago. We all lose our way sometimes, but the right people act as perfect mirrors, reflecting the exact pieces of our soul we thought were dead forever. Luca thrusts a finger toward the raw portraits, his voice slicing through the heavy room. He declares that the only art leaving a permanent mark comes from souls who refuse to be bought. Her true power, he insists, is pulling invisible. Broken people from the dark and framing them as legends. Arya swallows hard, her hands tremble, terrified. She will be crushed by this brutal city if she stays this vulnerable. Luca does not blink, his dark eyes lock onto hers, demanding she abandon the tragic lie that success requires selling her spirit. Later, their car glides through the evening dust, bathed in the amber bleed of a dying sun. You and I have probably both made this mistake. We forget that the most profound mercy we can offer is to ruthlessly believe in someone exactly as they are, without demanding a single change. The low hum of the engine fills the dark cabin, unbroken until Luca murmurs, "A quiet thank you." Arya keeps her knuckles white on the wheel, staring at the asphalt as she asks what he means. Let us examine the tragedy unraveling here. He strips away the glittering illusion of their world, explaining how their elite circle is terrified to reveal their muddy roots. Arya loosens her grip, whispering into the shadows that people are simply terrified of their shattered pieces. Luca turns toward the passing streetlights. He tells her she is far braver than she realizes, and she will outlive the burning wreckage of this chapter. She is entirely breathless. Handing your bleeding heart to another is a terrifying gamble, but letting your heavy armor fall is the only way to be truly seen. Giving descends like a quiet sigh, stripped of the exhausting theater of her past. Arya sits on the worn couch, sharing cold takeout with her father, while the muted television paints the dim room. He offers her profound grace here, refusing to pry into the bitter ashes of Marcus, or the agonizing betrayal of her friends. Instead, he meets her exhausted eyes and states, he is fiercely proud of the iron woman she is becoming. That quiet sentence tethers her drifting soul. The ensuing weeks blur into deep shadows in her studio, but this fragile peace shatters just days before Christmas, when an unknown number illuminates her phone in the dead of night. We naturally guard our quiet moments, yet sometimes, to permanently seal the door on a tragic history, you are forced to turn the cold brass handle one final time. You and I have likely survived that suffocating drop of the stomach. Arya presses the phone to her ear, and the trembling voice belongs to Caroline. Instantly, every ounce of warmth is siphoned from the bedroom. Arya answers with a tone carved from absolute winter, demanding to know what she wants. Caroline is unraveling, sobbing for mercy, and confessing the scale of her treason. Then the final pillar crumbles. She admits that she and Marcus are destroyed. We might expect Arya to drink in this karmic vengeance. Instead, an echoing weight settles into her bones. She releases a heavy breath into the dark and quietly tells Caroline she pities her suffering. This is the brutal truth of growth. Clinging to rage only incinerates your own soul, while the architect of your pain sleeps entirely undisturbed. The logical tragedy here is profound. Through the speaker, Caroline dissolves into tears, wrapping herself in the ragged cloak of a victim. She confesses the grotesque reality that her betrayal was born of sheer, terrifying loneliness. Observe Arya's physical response. She sits at the edge of her mattress encased in an unyielding stillness. She offers no velvet comforts or gentle absolutions. In the dark of her room, Arya realizes Caroline does not desire genuine redemption. She is simply choking on her own toxic guilt and requires an audience for her collapse. We must learn to identify this illusion. Often, an apology is never designed to reconstruct the ruined bridge. It is merely the desperate arsonist, begging for a witness as they stand shivering in the ashes of the world they burned. Silence stretching through the phone feels heavier than cast iron. The tension fractures, and Caroline whimpers a devastating confession. She misses her oldest friend. You can see the brutal internal war raging across Arya's face. Every instinct screams to comfort her, but the spiritual wounds run far too deep. Instead, she delivers a crushing truth. Her voice barely a ghost. Arya admits she misses her too, but shared mourning cannot wash away the bloodstain of betrayal. Caroline swallows the bitter reality. The line clicks dead. Arya remains frozen, staring into the dark corners of her room. There is no soaring orchestra here, no tearful reconciliation. Genuine healing rarely arrives with theatrical fanfare. It is simply waking up to a quiet morning and realizing the suffocating ghost you carried yesterday has finally left. Trembling from the emotional aftershocks, Arya messages Luca. Confessing her chest feels scraped hollow. Luca anchors her, a wall of calm against her storm, reminding her that reconstructing a demolished soul is a fiercely bloody business. Christmas morning breaks, and Arya barricades herself in absolute solitude, bathed in the crimson light of her dark room, pulling sanity from the silence. Then New Year's Eve bleeds into the city, and Luca shatters her isolation. His voice is a burst of warmth, sweeping her toward a hidden dinner with his inner circle. I want you to observe this critical shift. Discovering a tribe that lets you exhale your pain, without demanding you perform a flawless, rehearsed version of yourself, is the most impenetrable armor a human being can forge. The blue screen illuminates the hesitation in her eyes. She hovers, tempted to vanish into the cold safety of her apartment. She surrenders, but erects a titanium boundary. If the room feels wrong, she will leave without a backward glance. Luca's deep laughter echoes, unfazed by her defensive thorns. She enters an underground restaurant, stepping into a sanctuary of golden candlelight and strangers radiating warmth. They do not dissect her like a tragic specimen. They refuse to claw at the bleeding scabs of her past, or demand exhausting performances. They simply pour the wine and fold her into their laughter. There is a sacred magic in sitting beside strangers who let you simply breathe, without trying to carve out pieces of your spirit to feed themselves. The cinematic lens tightens halfway through the meal. A woman leans over the table, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. She reveals that Luca speaks of Arya constantly, utterly mesmerized by her portraits, and has never defended an artist's soul quite like hers. Arya is jolted. She steals a guarded glance at Luca, who remains oblivious, waving his hands in a passionate debate down the table. The midnight countdown hits, and the party spills onto the freezing concrete. passing cheap champagne under the streetlights. Amidst that breathless chaos, Arya feels a heavy, rusted lock inside her chest finally snap open. Here is the undeniable beauty of survival. You do not have to meticulously glue every shattered piece of your heart back together to truly live again. As laughter fades, Luca escorts her to the car, hands buried in his coat like a silhouette from a noir film. He murmurs the room adored her. Before dropping a bomb into the frozen air, his friend Sarah was curious if Arya was single. You can almost hear the frantic drumming of her pulse. She turns slowly, the street lamp catching her smile, and asks if he is the one terrified to know the answer. Luca freezes. He locks eyes with her, stripping away all pretense, and whispers, "Are you ready for me to ask?" The air between them crackles, but Arya refuses the trap of rushing a damaged heart. She holds his gaze and gently instructs him to ask again when the snow melts. "Listen to me on this. You can never force a brilliant harvest when your soul is still repairing the wintered soil." Luca does not let his ego build a wall. His face melts into a tender smile, quietly swearing to the dark that he will wait. He pulls her into a solid embrace under the flickering street lamp. There is no desperate rush here, only the steady anchor of absolute respect. As Arya navigates the empty roads home, brilliant fireworks paint the midnight canvas. She realizes the suffocating ghosts of Marcus and Caroline have vanished. She has utterly outgrown the tragic boxes they tried to lock her inside. Her mind drifts back to Luca. "You and I must remember this law. The most brilliant chapters of your life only ignite the moment you stop forcing the narrative. Every agonizing betrayal is merely the brutal fire required to forge your undeniable strength. Dawn is coming, and she is finally ready." Resurrecting a shattered life is never a flawless sequence. There are mornings Arya wakes with a blistering rage in her chest, grieving the stolen innocence of who she used to be. But witness the genius of her survival. She refuses to let the venom rot her veins. She weaponizes the agony, channeling the betrayal into the ferocious ambition of her lens. 90 days later, her editor calls to declare the feature is going to print. When the heavy magazine drops into her trembling hands, she holds it like a holy relic. She turns the pages to find 12 brilliant spreads of her raw, triumphant human portrait staring back at the world. When life hands you a catastrophic ruin, the ultimate revenge is gathering those jagged shards of glass and building an unbreakable empire of your own design. The camera pushes in on the edge of the printed page. Pressed in black ink against the gloss are the words she has bled to see. Photography by Arya Vale. A heavy tear breaks, tracing her cheek as her trembling fingers call Luca. Hearing his voice, she shrinks instinctively, rushing to hand him the glory, stammering that his guidance was her only salvation. But the line goes perfectly still. Luca's voice cuts through the static, low and unyielding. He tells her the fire was always hers alone, and he just happened to stand close enough to feel the heat. A laugh, ragged and pure, breaks from her chest. Let this sink in. The greatest act of rebellion is to stop apologizing for your brilliant work. Step out of the crushing dark and let them watch you shine. Tires crunch against the gravel of her childhood driveway. When the heavy door opens, her mother looks at the magazine, and devastating pride spills over in silent tears. Hours later, bathed in the glow of her monitor, Arya uploads as a single portrait. It is a quiet monument to her own survival. Praise floods in, until a notification makes the room turn freezing cold. Marcus, the man who nearly ruined her, is crawling back, offering hollow apologies. The camera lingers on the harsh light reflecting in her steady eyes. Her finger hovers, and without a single flinch, she deletes his message. Total beautiful silence. You and I must learn this brutal truth. Sometimes you must watch old dreams burn to ash, just to clear the dead soil for the fierce strength waiting beneath. Transformation is absolute. Warm lighting spills across a Brooklyn studio, illuminating her name in massive letters. Luca stands at her shoulder, locked on a haunting portrait of a tired librarian. His voice is a low murmur, affirming she built this empire. With her own hands, the ambient noise fades. Arya shifts her weight, holding his intense gaze. She asks if he is finally ready to answer the question she left hanging in the cold air of New Year's Eve. The camera captures the slight tremble in Luca's jaw. His heavy armor shatters, leaving him terrifyingly open, as he whispers he is ready to try. Here is the unforgiving truth. You must lay the heavy bricks of your own sanctuary, bleeding for every inch of ground, before you lower the drawbridge for another soul. That guarded smirk vanishes from Luca's face, melting into a smile so genuine it aches to witness. He whispers his surrender and wraps his fingers around her hand. The camera pulls back. For the first time, Arya is perfectly anchored, not because a man chose her, but because she crawled through hell to choose herself. The night erupts into a triumph of critical acclaim and a massive book deal. In a desperate bid for relevance, Caroline sends expensive flowers. Arya does not even find a vase. She leaves them on the cold marble counter, letting them wither into dry brown petals over the passing days. Let this sink in. Life is a violent, beautiful tragedy. Construct your own unshakable fortress first, and only then invite someone inside to share the breathtaking view. The camera goes wide. Her parents stand frozen before the gallery walls, silenced by the magnitude of her work. Hours later, the brass locks click shut. Arya is alone in the cavernous space, surrounded by the haunting eyes of her subjects. Shadows stretch across the floor as she remembers the shattered girl from a year ago. That fragile ghost, who begged for love from toxic people, is dead. In her place stands a woman hammered into steel within the crucible of her suffering. This is the truth you must carry. Your agonizing chapters are not your grave. They are the blazing furnace where your truest power is forged. Arya kills the overhead lights, plunging the room into darkness, and steps into the biting winter wind. The vast unknown is no longer a threat, it is a promise. Let us speak the ugly truth about betrayal. You and I both know the tearing agony of a knife twisting between your shoulder blades. You do not just wash that blood away. You survive by climbing so high that their malice can never touch you again. Arya built a towering fortress of self-respect. She walked barefoot through the roaring flames of her own ruin and emerged unburned. Her victory was not turning her heart to stone. Her victory was realizing her worth is never up for negotiation. The camera pushes in one last time. As she stands in the freezing dark, she pulls the bitter winter air deep into her lungs. That unshakable certainty is her absolute weapon. The crushing tragedy of the past is merely a dying ghost. She has irrevocably claimed her freedom.
Arya's career as a photographer becomes one of the most inspiring parts of the story. At first, she doubts herself. She wonders whether the opportunity from prestige is real, or only the result of Luca's influence. This fear is understandable. After being overlooked and betrayed, she struggles to trust her own talent. But once she begins working, her true gift becomes clear. Arya knows how to photograph people honestly. She does not simply capture beauty, status, or perfection. She captures vulnerability. She sees the guarded CEO, the tired nonprofit founder, the former athlete, and the writer who survived years of rejection. She understands how to reveal strength without hiding pain. This is a powerful educational lesson about success. Real success does not come from pretending to be someone else. It comes from discovering what only you can offer. Arya's best work is connected to her deepest wound. Because she knows what it feels like to be unseen, she becomes gifted at seeing others. Many people believe they must become harder, colder, or more impressive to succeed. But Arya's journey proves the opposite. Her sensitivity is not a weakness. Her emotional intelligence is part of her talent. Her pain does not destroy her art, it deepens it. The visit to the Westfield Art Collective reminds her of where she began. Before Marcus, before status, before the need to fit into someone else's world, she photographed ordinary people and made them unforgettable. That is her real voice. The lesson is clear. Do not abandon your authenticity in pursuit of success. The world does not need a copy of someone else. It needs the version of you that sees, feels, and creates in a way no one else can.